some organizations went through periods of having people, on reduced hours to help reduce the salary load, and then certain organizations able to get benefits of JobKeeper were applying for that in order to help them sustain their businesses. So it's certainly been a massive period of disruption, Peter. And I think, what we've seen out of this, that organizations and as human beings, we've all adapted quickly to change because we needed to. And I think, out of this, it's exciting in many respects for supply chain, because if we had planned some of these things to happen, they would have taken probably months and years to implement. But because COVID was a global scenario, we've all had to do it without question.
Yeah, I mean, that's been such an impact, and I guess it must have really highlighted some supply chain challenges just from a resilience perspective. When that if you think of the whole transport process globally has been interrupted, and people that are exposed to entrance into the supply chain, be it suppliers through a procurement process, where maybe they don't have a plan B, or they haven't, the supply from overseas has always been a safe bet. That must have really challenged a lot of people over the last few months.
Oh, absolutely. And I think we've seen, I've seen firsthand organizations that very successfully, maybe with just, I suppose, the foresight probably, or the strategic thinking of their executives and supply chain leaders, to look at how do we adapt and pivot in this market. There's one particular company that I won't name, but let's say they're in the cleaning products type marketplace, and they were going fine. I mean, they had a successful business, but they realized that for them to adapt and to maybe take an opportunity in this market, then they started producing sanitizer-based products, which obviously has become, it expanded their business significantly.
To say that there'd been a fair bit of demand.
Well, absolutely. And I think, but even you think about the product, and we're also used to now sanitizing, in all sorts of locations, anytime we're, be it in or out of home.
Right.
But the reality is they looked at different points of sanitization, be it in, external environments, corporate environments, domestic environments, and they came up with a range of products, which meant they needed to then look at different packaging formats or dispensing formats. And, out of that, they needed to look at all the different channels. And again, that was really clever, smart thinking by the individuals concerned. Then if I look at another sector, which is critical to, was seen as critical to marketplace in the beverage space, obviously the whole closure of pubs, clubs and entertainment locations, huge impact to this business, because they literally, their volume supply chain literally diminished overnight for a period of time. So then they had to basically redeploy their workforce into going into more, if you like, private or, domestic supply chain, because no longer were people going out, but they were still, consuming from home. Yeah. So they adapted their model to meet that high demand of, and still, it was really around retraining or regrouping their employees in order to be, adding value within their functions, but reskilling to the different type of supply chain routing that they know how to do, from bulk delivery to small order, high volume delivery.
Do you think there's opportunity locally, in as much that for people to perhaps build a bit more resilience or security of supply in troubled times like this, where people have been sourcing overseas, they may try and source more locally?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic that actually is ASCI has had a couple of webinars on this during this period.
Right.
You know, I suppose the term that's there's reshoring, rehoming. There's a few different terminologies being thrown around at the moment, but I think what people have figured out is that certain critical components of your supply chain, that those that have been unfortunate have actually been left in a lot of pain
Yeah.
because they don't have the key component parts, or the supplier from a logistics perspective, they've been they've not been in a priority position, or the movement of product into the build supply chain
Mm-hmm.
has been disrupted dramatically.
Right.
So
Right.
therefore, I think organizations are starting to look at their whole end to end rather than, with a lot more detail
Right. Right.
of
Yeah.
where everything is coming from. When you think about, complex, I feel like, I suppose, one product type that's pretty complex, it might be technology based products. It might be a laptop as an example, or some such devices
Mm-hmm.
where you've got literally thousands of component parts, and they're built in sub-assemblies right down to final assembly in maybe one particular location. So what we have seen is that organizations have realized that there's certain high risk parts of your supply chain that there needs to be some refocus on, whether there's an argument in place to bring it more locally to region. May
Right.
not necessarily be back into Australia, but there could be some argument for organizations to say, from a security of your supply chain, there now could be a presentation as we move forward to businesses, or in businesses, to say that we need to control certain parts of this ourselves, or have a very, very close rein on this, so as that we don't have this risk exposure in the future.
Yeah, it's interesting. We obviously get to talk to a lot of companies, and one of the things that's become clear is supply chain security of supply and supply chain resilience has now become a board topic,
Yep.
which of course, we wouldn't have to go back too far in time for that not to be a major consideration for a board at any one time. So the focus is definitely changing across industries, which in itself, I guess, opens up opportunities.
Yeah. No, and I think, to your point, Peter, what used to be, and this is just a general comment, but what used to be long-term strategy, I think what we're seeing, what people are talking to me about now, is that let's say the 5-year strategy is probably being pulled back into shorter focus,
Oh
because
yeah,
there's
yeah,
been,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, there's been so much change so quickly that, it's almost impossible to tell what your supply chain will look like. Will it look the same as it does now in 2 years, 3 years time? Probably not. And people need to adapt more quickly. And that means also more use of technology in your supply chain. And that's probably from a data analytics, a lot more updated, like to live, active information to use to make decisions.
Yeah, look, we've seen a definite trend. And when you look globally, the sort of move into this, I mean, without COVID, that is, just the move generally into the more connected, often coined, the industrial 4.0, where businesses are instantly connected globally, machines are talking to machines,
Yeah.
supply chain shapes are changing, where you might have smaller manufacturing at the point of sale, like 3D printing and things like that.
Yes.
The whole landscape's changing, and markets themselves are moving many times faster than they were before. I think companies are generally realizing that real-time data is a requirement to speed the decision cycle up from the sort of traditional monthly and quarterly cycles that businesses have been in. And I think supply chain's a great example of that. If you don't have visibility through your value chain when the markets are changing on a day or a weekly basis, you're going to be challenged, aren't you? And
yeah, and I think that's, that the key is now to having that visibility. But it does surprise me, Peter, that, let's say, organizations, large corporate organizations, which we all probably assume that they have this, all of this technology embedded and seamless flow of communication and data flow. It's not necessarily the case. They're still developing and implementing tools and getting it to meet their requirements. So there's still a lot of work to do, which is a great opportunity for organizations.
Yeah.
Under the guise of, and I suppose the prioritization of what's happened in COVID, where they may have been left a bit short because they're working on data that might have been, 2-3 weeks old, and therefore no longer relevant.
Yeah, it's kind of static data is dead on arrival, isn't it, nowadays, with the way that it's shifting. And of course, COVID's just made that, accelerated that even more. I mean, the dynamic form of markets at the moment is just incredible. It's we've never seen anything like it before. That that said, organisations like ASCI must add more value now than they've ever added before. I mean, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what you like best about serving the customers in ASCI, and how people benefit.
Yeah, so the aim of ASCI is really to add value back to the community that it services, Peter. So what I say about that is, our members are probably fall into categories of corporates, and corporates can have, anything from 1 to a dozen or maybe more in some case members. And then you've got individual membership, which are those who are, paying out of their own pocket as part of their own supply chain development, if you like, because their career, I guess their passion for their career. So as much as there's the courses that we've talked about, sort of underpinned by an APICS type of discipline, ultimately it's about adding value in the sense that each month there's typically up to 4 webinar events. And those are now done with the fantastic use of present active technology we're all living on, being able to register and tune in on a topic that may be of interest to you. It's typically hosted by a panel or a guest speaker, presentation with some Q&A. And the intent is really that we have in each chapter polled members to see what people want to hear and learn about. Right. So, and then in getting that feedback, we're then presenting, it might be individual special interest groups, or a series, which is, for example, there's a resilience series, which we have been doing recently, and you've supported with as well, Peter. So the reality is we're listening to the members to say, what do you want to hear about? What will be of value to you? And then secondly, we're looking at developing what you might call special interest groups. So one that's been in its development phases and will launch next year more formatively will be described as a SNOP or IBP interest group. Oh. And I think if that's, if you look at that as a particular area out of the whole COVID period, organizations that have managed to really adapt and really engage as an executive in support and delivery of SNOP or IBP are ones that have been more successful. And I guess the theory, the actual theory has been proven through members that we know who've really